Hi, this is Patrick from LSAT Lab. Welcome to a little lesson on conditional logic. We want to talk about what a conditional statement does and doesn't tell us. We want to get familiar with some of the most popular keywords that indicate conditional logic. And then we want to do a little practice, trying to diagram sentences as conditional statements. A conditional statement has an arrow, and you read it as if the thing on the left is true, then the thing on the right is true. If you're in New York City, then you're in the USA. The arrow is certainty. So anytime we write one of these rules, we trust it. If the left side is true, it must be that the right side is also true. When the sufficient condition is met, the left side is triggered, and then the outcome necessarily follows. If Linda's in New York City, can we make any inferences from this rule about whether or not she's in the USA? Sure. If she's in New York City, yes, she's definitely in the USA. If Joe isn't in New York City, does this rule allow us to make any inferences about whether or not he's in the USA? Of course not. He might be in the USA, he might not. Maybe he's in Paris, maybe he's in Miami. The important thing is this idea that when you learn that the trigger isn't applicable, he's not in New York City, then the rule just disappears. There's no way to break that rule. The rule has no power over us. It also doesn't tell us anything. What if we learn that Alice is in the USA? Does this rule allow us to conclude whether or not she's in New York City? No. I mean, maybe she is, maybe she's in San Francisco. What's very tempting to students is when we find out the right side is true, we want to assume, okay, well, so does that mean the left side is true? She's in New York City? We got to resist that temptation. Don't read conditionals backwards. You're running straight into the head of an arrow. So painful and also illogical. On flaw questions, a lot of LSAT authors are going to make this mistake. They're going to present a rule, say that the right side is happening, and then think that that proves that the left side is happening, and that's called confusing the necessary and the sufficient. What if we say that Dave is not in the USA? Does this rule tell us anything about whether or not he's in New York City? Yeah, it should. If he's not in the USA, he's definitely not in New York City. So a conditional statement has a sufficient on the left and a necessary on the right. The only time we can use these rules is if we know the sufficient is true, or if we know the necessary is not true. There's a term we're going to hear a million times called the contrapositive. The contrapositive says when the outcome isn't true, I guess the trigger isn't true. If you're not in the USA, then you obviously can't be in New York City. A conditional statement and its contrapositive are like two sides of the same coin. You can really even picture a contrapositive like a flip of the coin, where we flip this upside down, and now we're going from upside down right to upside down left. But what do we mean by upside down? We mean we've flipped the truth value. We've either gone from true to false or false to true. So a contrapositive is saying if you're not to the right side, you're not the left side. LSAT is primarily presenting us with conditional logic to test whether or not we're capable of seeing contrapositive logic. They're also trying to make sure that we don't get sloppy and stumble into illegal moves where you go from right to left, or where you assume if the trigger doesn't apply, then the outcome doesn't apply. There's one last rule. In this conditional statement, I have the word and on the trigger. If A and B are both true, that triggers the rule and tells me C. When we write the contrapositive, our job is to basically flip the truth value of everything. So we start with upside down right side. If not C, then not A. And what's critical here is that when we're flipping truth values, and turns into or. Similarly, if we had an or, it would turn into and. Try one of these on your own for a second. Pause the recording. Think about what the contrapositive of this rule would look like. When we write the contrapositive, we start if the right side were not true. If I flip all the truth values of the right side. So yes, Y becomes not Y, or becomes and not Z becomes yes, Z. And that would prove the right side, not X. So when you're flipping truth values, and transforms into or or transforms into and. All right, so what are we going to be doing with all these conditional statements? Well, there's two main activities. We're often going to be chaining conditionals together, or we're going to be getting a conditional rule and then triggering that rule with a fact and deriving some other factual inference. So sometimes when we're working with conditional logic, we're deriving another conditional logic statement. Other times we'll be working with conditional logic and be deriving a factual statement. Given these three conditional statements, what sort of new conditional could we infer? Well, we could infer that if A, then D, or by contrapositive, if not D, then not A. When you have more than one conditional, you ask yourself, do these connect? Do they chain together? And these three conditionals we were given give us this cool chain. A leads to B, B leads to C, C leads to D. We can contrapose entire chains and start from the back and go, all right, so if not D, not C, not B, not A. Now, LSAT normally rewards our ability to connect the beginning of the chain to the ending of the chain, but other times they test us on intermediate inferences, so it's also valid to derive that A leads to C, B leads to D, not D leads to not B, not C leads to not A. Here we've got a mixture of conditionals and facts. So we have a rule that says if A is true, then at least one of B or C must be true. And then we have a fact that's telling you, okay, yeah, A is true. Also a fact saying C is not true. So what's the factual inference we can derive? We would know that B is true. A triggers that rule, and then at least one of those two things, B or C, has to be the outcome. Since we already know it can't be C, it must be B. Here's an even more complex one. Pause the recording and think, what would go in that question mark? What could we infer if B is true? We could infer that if B, then D. We could have also inferred if B, then C. But this one would be more likely what they would be testing. Because those first two conditionals chain together, they say if A and B are both true, then you get C. And if you get C, you get D. Then we're provided the fact that A is happening. So all we need now is B, and we'll trigger that chain. That's why our conditional is saying if we add B, then we would get C and D. You just did it. You just mastered conditional logic, basically. Now what we got to do is get good at hearing when it's actually being tested. And that comes down to a lot of keywords. Conditional logic appears in any sentence that provides certainty. So you're going to see that in different contexts. You might have rules or principles like if A, then B. Universal categorical statements, all A's are B. Causal guarantees, where this thing always leads to that thing. And then requirements. This thing requires that thing. It's very important that you learn to read a conditional statement as the left side requires the right side. Consider the statements like, you can't get into Yale without a great LSAT score, and you must study hard if you want to get a great LSAT score. Now try to put that into this thing requires that thing language. Getting into Yale requires a great LSAT score. Having a great LSAT score requires studying hard. That allows us to chain together requirements so that we can synthesize and say, oh, okay, so getting into Yale requires that I study hard. Go ahead and pause the recording and look through these sentences. All of these sentences would still be diagrammed the way you see at the top. If A, then B. All right, so as you see, there's a lot of keywords in here that we want to get used to that will signify, hey, conditional logic's being tested. Here's a list of the main conditional keywords. Anytime you see any of the words in the left side column, you'll put the idea attached to that keyword on the left of the arrow. And when you see any of the words in the right column, you'll take the idea that's attached to that word and put it on the right side of the arrow. It's a lot of words to memorize, but we can cluster some of them together. We've got words that signify rules. We've got a bunch of universal terms, some guarantees, and a lot of words that mean this thing requires that thing. There's a lot of words listed there that are requirements, and there are even more words we're not listing. So with requirements, the most important thing is that you memorize the feel of, okay, if they're telling me one thing's required, the required thing goes on the right. There's a few words here that we need to follow up on because they actually have a little bit of a trick to them. If we get a no statement, like no camels attend law school, and then we want to put it into if-then form, the danger is that we read too literally and we think, okay, so if not camel, then attend law school. But we got to think about what that rule is saying. If something isn't a camel, then I'm sure it attends law school. That doesn't seem right. Try it the other way. If something attends law school, then I'm sure it's not a camel. Yes, that seems right. So what's going on with these no statements? Well, one way to think about how to symbolize it correctly would be to say, it looks like it goes backwards, like attend law school leads to no camel. That's true, you can use that methodology if you'd like to. What's the contrapositive to our rule? It would be, if you are a camel, you don't attend law school. A different way to deal with no statements is to think to yourself, okay, I know that when I see no, the no actually applies to the second part of the sentence. So it's really, if camel, then no attend law school. That's how I want to read it. We can also think about switching from a negative to a positive. No camels attend means the same as all camels don't attend. There are a few negative to positive translations we want to make. The most important one is this conditional one. If we see no A's are B, that turns into all A's are not B. The negative is modifying the second idea. And that's true for all these negative to positive translations. If we're told that few A's are B, we turn that into most A's are not B. Not all A's are B, we turn that into some A's are not B. Whenever I see a negative, I translate it into positive because it's much easier for our brains to understand these facts when they're presented in positive form. So when we see no, the attached idea does go on the left side of the arrow, but you need to apply the no to the second half of the sentence. Camels goes on the left, and apply the no to the second half of the sentence. Or clean it up by rewriting it as a positive. No camels are lawyers is the same as all camels are not lawyers. Unless is a really important word. If, only if, and unless are the three most frequently used words up here. Anything attached to if goes on the left of the arrow. Anything that comes after only if goes on the right of the arrow. Unless, until, and without are a little bit weirder. We need to do an if not translation, or we need to think about what's the required thing. Consider this sentence. Eddie can't go to Legoland until he feeds his rabbit. If I see any of these three words, I'll start thinking, okay, I know I can replace until with if not. If not feeds rabbit, can't go to Legoland. The other option I have is to think through requirement vision. Okay, what's required here in this story? Okay, well, his parents are saying it's required that you feed your rabbit. So feed rabbit goes on the right, required on the right. We can read this statement as Legoland requires that he feed his rabbit. Remember, the original if not formulation would give us the contrapositive. If not feed rabbit, then not Legoland. Here's another example. Without Rashida's positive attitude, this would have been a disaster. Let's translate this. We can use if not, and that'll look like if not positive attitude, then disaster. Or we can try to hear it as a requirement. All right, what was needed? What was required? Oh, well, we needed Rashida's positive attitude. That's going on the right side. We needed it in order to avoid disaster. Averting disaster required her positive attitude. The first way we did it was if not positive attitude, then disaster, which is the contrapositive of what we just came up with. One last one. Happiness is never achieved unless love or passion is present. All right, unless. My if not buddy. What if I put a if not in here? So if not love or passion present, then no happiness. I have to be careful here and put parentheses because this is a complex idea. It's negating the idea of love or passion. You're saying it's not the case that love or passion is present, which means both of them are absent. There's not love and there's not passion. So if we're ever negating a complex idea with and or, we got to remember we're flipping truth values, and so that means or becomes and becomes or. What does the requirement sound like? Well, it's saying happiness requires at least love or passion. So anytime we see these three words, we can either choose to replace it with if not and put the attached idea on the left side but negated. We just have to watch out if it's a complex idea. Negating involves flipping and or. Or we can try to think through the logic of which thing is required. I know I put that on the right side of the arrow. When I see the word no, I can put the attached idea on the left side of the arrow, but I have to negate the thing on the right side. Similarly, when I see unless, until, or without, I can put that idea on the right side, but I need to negate the left side. There's one other set of keywords we need to discuss, and it's called biconditionals. It basically combines a left side and a right side idea. So if and only if, then and only then, when and only when, and even otherwise we'll see as a way to create a biconditional. The word if means put it on the left. The word only if means put it on the right. So when we say if and only if, it's saying put it on the left and put it on the right. If we read, Jeff gets to take a vacation if but only if Trixie gets a promotion. If means put it on the left, so we would put promotion on the left, vacation on the right. Only if, though, means put it on the right, so we should be putting promotion on the right and putting vacation on the left. And of course, both things are correct. A promotion implies a vacation implies a promotion. So what we do with biconditionals is we often can use a double-sided arrow to just indicate that these ideas go in both directions. When we write a contrapositive, we don't really need to switch the order because the arrow goes in both directions, so it doesn't matter. So when you see wording like if and only if, then and only then, you'll need to decide for yourself, do I want to do this as a couple two-sided conditionals, or do I want to just write it as an either or? Personally, I prefer the either or option, but a lot of other people use the arrows. Here's an example of how otherwise can be used to create a biconditional. We're saying Jeff will take a vacation if he wins the lottery. So if lottery, that's going on the left, then vacation. The otherwise is saying if he doesn't win the lottery, he won't take a vacation. That looks like an illegal opposite, but we're not making an illegal inference. We were actually given two separate conditionals, one of which is the opposite of the other. And when you contrapose both rules, you can start to see that we're dealing with a double-sided arrow. A leads to B leads to A. Not B leads to not A leads to not B. So once again, we can clean this up and just think we're going to put double-sided arrows. Or if we prefer, we can write it as an either or. Either both things happen, he wins the lottery and takes a vacation, or we're in the world where neither thing happens. Doesn't win lottery, doesn't take vacation. Okay, so we've familiarized ourselves with a lot of the major keywords and even looked at the 3 or 4 troublemaker ones that involve a little bit more technique. Let's try to apply this. We're going to give you a cheat sheet up top for now. At some point, you can take off these training wheels, but initially when you work on conditional logic, have a little list handy so that you can reinforce what's the keyword, what does that word tell me to do with this idea? Put it on the left, put it on the right, do an if not, do a negative to positive. Pause the recording, work through these 10, put them as an if this, then that, and write their contrapositive, and then unpause when you want to check your answers. Welcome back. The first one has a keyword when. When is a left side idea. So on the left of the arrow, we put totes. On the right, we put Paloma's annoyed. If somebody says totes, Paloma's annoyed. Contrapositive, if Paloma's not annoyed, then nobody said totes. Number 2, the keyword is implies. Implies signifies a right side idea. It actually, you want to think of it as the arrow. So we would put enjoyment of sugar on the right. And we could think of this as enjoying fudge implies enjoying sugar. Contrapositive, If you don't enjoy sugar, I do not recommend fudge. Number 3, the keyword is no. So we have to remember, all right, what do I do with no? This is about all cowards, and it's saying cowards no play volleyball. If coward, no play volleyball. Contrapositive, if you play volleyball, you're not a coward. The keyword in this one is poop. No, I'm sorry. The keyword in this one is the word each, which is a left side universal. So if you're one of Lou's golf balls, then you are covered in bird poop. If you're not covered in bird poop, then you're not one of Lou's golf balls. Number 5 has the keyword unless. So we either need to use an if not or a required on the right. If we use if not, we're thinking, if you not apologize, I'm going to quit. If we're thinking about requirements, it sounds like I'm saying, hey, you need to apologize. The apology goes on the right. If you want me to not quit, then that requires you apologize. Number 6 has a keyword up here that I didn't include. That's part of what conditional logic is all about. Sometimes LSAT surprises you with a word you haven't memorized, and you need to think about, okay, how does this work? We're making a universal about real men, so we can put real men as a trigger. We're saying never, which is sort of like a no negative translation. If you're a real man, then you're not shying away from a yogurt parfait. Whereas if you do shy away from a yogurt parfait, you're not a real man. Number 7, the keyword is any, although this is a trick question. You could have construed the keyword as will and said, if you're that church, I know you will accept true worshipers. That would also be correct. Any is a categorical, a universal. So it goes on the left. If you're a true worshiper, the church is going to accept you. If you're not being accepted, that guarantees that you're not a true worshiper. Number 8 uses the word only. Only and only if are both required ideas that we put on the right. So cool people is going on the right. Using breath strips instead of mints is going on the left. Contrapositive, if you're not cool, then you're not using breath strips. Number 9 uses without, which is one of our if not translations. So I would be doing if not tea and snacks. I'm negating a complex idea. I got to switch everything. So if not tea and snacks can't work, but I need to distribute that negative sign. If not tea or not snacks, then not work. If I don't want to deal with that, I'm going to think through the lens of required. Vanessa can't work without tea and snacks. She needs the tea and snacks. Tea and snacks go on the right. Working requires tea and snacks. Number 10 uses the word prerequisite, which is not on this list, but it's similar to requires. It should feel like it lends itself to thinking, what's the necessary thing? What's required? Learning to walk is a prerequisite. So learning to walk has to go on the right, where required things go. Running requires that you've learned to walk. If you haven't learned to walk, good luck running. All right, so our job with conditional logic is going to be getting steadily better at seeing these words and knowing effortlessly what that means in terms of, do I put this idea on the left, on the right, or do I need to do some if not or negative translation? Other than that, there's not a lot to conditional logic. When you're given a statement, you have to prove that you understand the contrapositive. And when you're writing contrapositives, you got to prove that you know that ors and ands switch. Other than that, just don't get fooled into going backwards or into doing some illegal opposite. If you'd like to watch some other videos of ours on YouTube, click here or visit us at lsatlab.com.